Well, welcome to Campus Guard's webinar, Payment Fraud Trends in Higher Ed and How to Stop Them at the Browser. My name is Kathy Staples, and I'm the Marketing Manager at Campus Guard. We are recording today's webinar, so look for an email with a link to the recording in the next day or two. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat, and we'll answer as many as we can following the presentation. We want your feedback about today's content, so please complete our brief survey after the event has ended. Today, we're exploring e-skimming attacks, how they work, why they're so effective, and the critical steps you must take to reduce your institution's exposure. And we'll also provide an effective action plan to go from zero to compliance in 30 days or less, and much more. Let's get started by introducing today's presenter. Matt McGurk is the Senior Director and Global Head of Field Engineering for Source Defense. Matt is an expert in JavaScript, web technology, client-side risk, and client-side security. He has over 15 years of experience in web application development, web app security, and website administration. He's served as a consultant and analyst to Fortune 50 companies on how best to secure their customer-facing web properties and business-critical applications. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and thanks to everybody who joined or is still joining the webinar today. As was mentioned, our topic is e-skimming and payment fraud security in higher education in specific. And for anyone who's familiar, the requirements in PCI DSS, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, that were made into requirements instead of best practice in April of this year. I'm sure everyone's kind of eager to think about that and understand the requirements and how they work. We're going to do a quick kind of survey here at the beginning and get a gauge for folks' familiarity with the topic. This just kind of helps me dial in the presentation and talk about the stuff that's most relevant to you. I'll also take questions. I try to answer those throughout as best I can. I keep an eye on the chat and stuff. And we'll also make sure that everything gets attended to at the end. And without further ado, let's kick it off. So obviously, we're here with Campus Guard, and we're talking about their script-safe solution that helps with defeating these kind of attacks that can steal credit card numbers and other sensitive information from inside your web pages as your visitors are doing their thing on your websites. Source Defense then is the partner that powers that solution. So Source Defense is a cybersecurity software company. We've been in existence for about 10 years. And this is all we do. We help with web application client-side security. So that term is kind of the, most complete, most inclusive term for this problem. And what happens, really to boil it all the way down, we're talking about the code inside of web pages as it runs and as it makes our sites interactive. And I'm seeing across the poll, yeah, that's pretty representative of what I've seen. So I speak to all of Source Defense's current customers, all the folks coming on board with Campus Guard. I pretty much talk to everybody. And the poll's pretty evenly split across the different levels of familiarity. Like I said, these requirements went from best practice to actual, you have to do it in April of this year. There were certainly a lot of folks who got the jump on it and were ready in time for that April deadline. And over the last 6-9 months or so, it's been a matter of folks hitting their renewals on their SAQs or their ROCs or their assessments otherwise, and seeing the gap and filling it. So I think you're in the right place if you have a foundational understanding of it or even a more advanced one. And we'll try to make sure that you're up to speed with everything new and how to solve for it. Real briefly, like I said, Source Defense has been out here for a long time. We're looking specifically in depth at third-party service integration and making sure that third-party risk management is handled very well. That's part of the equation here, meaning you got services most likely like Google Analytics or Facebook Connect or so on and so forth integrated into those payment pages. And that's like a huge, complicated part of the thing we're trying to solve for. I wanted to point out that there is a general kind of security case for this outside of PCI DSS. So I know that's kind of like why everyone's very excited about getting this solved. But, in a general sense, there's a lot of applicability for solving the security problem. So for instance, the folks who I was working with 5 years ago wanted to solve this problem because generally it was a security issue for websites. Now, along the way, PCI obviously has taken notice of it and built a requirement around it. There is a lot of relevance under GDPR for anybody who does work across the pond or anywhere in Europe, really, any other body of water that it's across. GDPR. In fact, the first one of these e-skimming attacks that was really well publicized was British Airways, for anyone who's familiar. And that was the first fine levied under GDPR, which was pretty new at the time, and also the largest. It was like 275 million US. So GDPR, for anyone who has in their portfolio any kind of healthcare stuff at your institution, there is absolutely reason to be interested about this in the HIPAA arena. Meta, the company that owns Facebook, is like being sued. Both, I mean, they're always being sued for something, but they're being really specifically targeted over the integration of Facebook Connect into healthcare contexts. So, like, find a doctor sites, if you have Facebook Connect there, can turn into a medical record, and then you got to care about it for HIPAA reasons. So anybody who's got that in their wheelhouse, you may be interested. And then in a more general financial sense, there is some financial regulation around it. So again, today we're going to be focused pretty closely on PCI DSS, but I would urge you to think about this as an overall compliance case for your institution, as well as, like I said, a general security thing. Like, it's a good idea to solve this just because it makes our web applications and websites and visitors more secure. So moving through, the underlying problem, like the reason we are all here today, is because of something called JavaScript. And JavaScript is the programming language that makes everything inside of a web page interactive. So whether that's a simple animation, or it's a math calculation to do like a subtotal, or it's all the way on the other end of the spectrum to like running Microsoft Office inside of your web browser, that's JavaScript as well. This language was specified, was created like 30 years ago, and nobody really thought about security like as part of it. I mean, literally, it was designed famously in like 7 days over the course of a weekend to compete with the Microsoft technology. Whoops, let me go back here. And so security kind of didn't get added to the mix, unfortunately. The root problem is, like I said, JavaScript has no native security controls. So no matter what that code inside the web page is supposed to do, or where it came from, it can do anything to the web page, and it can do anything to the data inside of the web page. So that's the root cause here. If you are paying attention to kind of the security trade publications or other people who talk about this stuff, you may have heard a variety of different terms. MageCart is kind of the quote unquote brand name. Like, this is what security researchers decided to coin it, to define it as back in the day. MageCart is a combination of the words Magento, which is an e-commerce platform, and shopping cart. That was the first place this emerged popularly. And so that's how that came about. PCI calls it e-skimming, which I like just fine. It's meant to evoke the idea of a physical credit card skimmer, like at a gas station pump, because that's one of the most common ways of doing this, of just sitting silently inside the web page and skimming off card numbers. Form jacking, credential harvesting, click jacking, other kinds of things. There's a lot of other general terms. All I'm trying to leave you with here is that the security industry has coalesced around e-skimming as the term, or web application client-side security, if you're looking for the other side of it. If you were going to Google something, those would be good things to Google. The idea behind JavaScript, like I mentioned, is it makes everything inside a web page interactive. And I wanted to point out a few things here. One is that this code kind of just balloons in size and complexity. And somebody recently used the word in a conversation, sprawl. So like, you start out with a relatively, so to speak, set of code for a web page and what it does. And then after everybody, all the stakeholders who are interested in its ability, get to add their own tools like Facebook or advertising or analytics or so on and so forth. The majority of a web page, on average, is not under your control. It's not something that you or your team wrote specifically to be the web page. It's something that was added and is controlled by another organization. And there's really two flavors of JavaScript I want to point out in this equation. You have third-party JavaScript. That's stuff, like I said a few times, like outside ad tech, Twitter, X, etc. These are code. These are source files that are literally retrieved from other parts of the internet on the fly by the browser. You're asking another company to serve code into the visitor's browser. That's third-party JavaScript. You also have what I would call first-party JavaScript, which can include like open source libraries and other stuff like that. This is things that your institution or organization would own like there's a developer who wrote it or knows why it's there. So first-party JavaScript is an important versus third-party is an important distinction because you have to manage it slightly different and the risks are slightly different. The other aspect of this that I think is important to point out as we understand the general problem is the supply chain effect. So what I mean by that is any given web page will have a lot of JavaScript, but it will also have a lot of JavaScript that loads other JavaScript as the page is running. So you might have, a dozen, half dozen different tools loaded into your page that you or your team has decided to put there. However, those tools will load their own relationships on the fly into the web page. So you get something like a marketing tool like Taboola that wants to use a data collection tool like Solvi that in turn uses Facebook Connect. And keep in mind, this is all something that's happening dynamically as the web page is running. And in a lot of cases, you may not even be aware that these relationships exist. So that's why it's so tricky to solve for this, especially in the context of DSS, where they're asking you to do things like inventory and assure the integrity of these scripts and et cetera, et cetera. It's a shifting and constantly, constantly refreshing ecosystem. Not refreshing in the sense of like a lovely beverage, but changing every time the page loads potentially, which makes it really tricky to solve for. Also, if you've read the spec, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but CSP and SRI, content security policy, and sub-resource integrity, which are two things that are kind of mentioned in the guidance in DSS to solve for 643 and 1161, they can be extremely difficult to implement because of this idea. You have to have an inventory of all of your JavaScript, and that can be very difficult to do when it's added dynamically to your web pages. The second part of it with SRI, which is a hashing technique, a fingerprinting technique, is these scripts will often change at the time that they are loaded. Like Facebook will embed a user token to say, oh yeah, this user just loaded this file. So if the files change at the time they are loaded, how could you fingerprint that and have it, matter or match ever? It would just fail every time. So CSP and SRI. Then with all that context, the way that the attacks happen is basically like this. In the middle of my screen here, I have a web browser. This web browser will talk to a web server and load the content that the page is made of. Along the way, you'll have stuff like a firewall and TLS SSL and all sorts of other good stuff. The reason we mention this at this point is because these things don't help. So a common kind of misconception is, oh, I have a firewall, or oh, I have such and such a piece of security technology in my stack. And unfortunately, these technologies are important. Don't get me wrong. And other parts of DSS kind of mandate that you have stuff like this. But in terms of client side and e-skimming attacks, these are about making sure that traffic or adversaries, hackers who are trying to get into the server are defeated. The firewall is supposed to stop bad traffic. The TLS SSL makes sure that it can't get man in the middle, all that stuff. The attack for this case is going to happen, though, after all that stuff has fired and done its job. It's going to happen inside the web page. So our web page loads. We're outside that kind of security perimeter. The page is going to load first-party JavaScript and also a huge amount of third-party JavaScript in most cases. And as I've mentioned a few times, all that stuff is going to be unsecured and unmonitored. So it's all going to run with whatever level of permission it wants, basically. That means that this is a very ripe environment for exploitation. Like, it's very attractive to an attacker to get into that environment and take advantage of all that privilege. And one of the most popular ways for them to do this is with a supply chain attack, meaning that they're not going to bother necessarily trying to get to your servers. They may very well. Those are, don't get me wrong, a form of attack. But a really attractive way for an attacker to do this is to get somewhere upstream in the supply chain, because then they get all of the customers of this tool and then all of the visitors to all the customer in this case for the advertising tool would be a higher ed institution or an e-com website, or et cetera. They get all those sites, and then they get all the visitors to those sites, and then they are able to skim credit card numbers off the page. What I'd like to do at this point is just show you guys a quick practical demonstration of this. And some of you may have seen this before, but some of you may have not. So what I've got on the screen here is the New York Times book review. For no specific reason, just they're a public website, and they don't have a security solution for this in place. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just manipulating the traffic to and from this single web browser. I didn't do anything to the New York Times. You don't have to call the FBI after this or anything. I can just, inject a client-side attack because, like we said, all this stuff happens inside of the web page. The other thing I'll point out here, just real quick, what I did was open the developer tools in this web browser. And the reason I did this was just to show you the amount of JavaScript that is loading in here as I visit the web page. This is just kind of under the hood. And so in this case, there are 51 different script files loaded from different parts of the internet. You can see that some of this is coming from the New York Times itself. So I would call this first-party code. But the overwhelming majority of it is coming from other parts of the internet. So, DoubleClick and Scorecard and et cetera, et cetera. This is the nature of the problem is if this were a payment page, how do we inventory all this? How do we assure the integrity of it, et cetera, et cetera. So the nature of the attack, the assumption we're making here is that malicious code has snuck into that list. So when I click login here, you're going to see basically the web page load on the left, and on the right, our attack has sprung into action. So in reality, of course, these things don't have a black and green terminal window to show you what's happening. But for my demo, I like to have something visual. And so the attack is kind of narrating itself on the right-hand side. So being back in visitor land, when I start to type in my stuff into this login form, you can see that the attack has no problem skimming any field on the page. Again, because unlimited permission for any code, no matter what it is. And then I think a little bit more interestingly is that the code has managed to inject its own form into the login workflow. So normally this is not part of if you go log into the New York Times right now, you will not see this happen because it's the attack script doing it in order to, a little bit of social engineering and a whole lot of the client-side attack vector to get this information that the visitor wouldn't normally enter at this point. And really what I'm trying to illustrate is, you get the question in the DSS context of like, well, what about iframes? Like if you use an iframe from a payment service provider, I thought that was kind of undefeatable, like no one could get into the iframe and it's so on and so forth. And something, at least for me, in kind of with my engineer brain sometimes, is you have to ignore the like ultra technical, how could you break into an iframe, 0 days in Google Chrome, all that stuff. The goal of the attacker is to get a credit card number. So what they're going to do is just show a form and say, give me the card number. And then in the DSS context, you see the language double entry attack, where the attacker will simply perfectly replicate the payment form, lay it on top of the legitimate form, and then the visitor will type in their credit card number once. The attacker will say, hey, that failed, remove their fake form and let the visitor complete their transaction. So entering the card number twice, double entry attack. So that's all possible because of this manipulation of the web page. So when I click submit here, you can see that the data can get sent anywhere else on the internet. One more nice advantage for the attacker is that they can transmit data wherever they want and using whatever technique they want, like encryption or signal or all that good stuff. They could also just let the visitor continue to log in and do their thing. My demonstration kind of punts us off to a contact support page because I don't want to log in to the Times. I don't want to do anything to the Times website during my demos. But in a real case, they could simply allow the user to log in, allow the transaction to go through, and then you've got a really good silent attack that's going to keep persisting for a really long time. So that's the nature of an e-skimming attack. The other thing I wanted to point out at this point in the presentation was just kind of a plug, I guess, a little bit for the work that the source defense research team do. So we have experts. Yeah, let's go as far as to say the foremost experts in this kind of attack on the world work here at Source Defense. And they do a lot of research regularly. If you want to hit up sourcedefense.com/resources/blog, or certainly just click the link in here at the top. We do, like this is over just the last couple months, a lot of different research and a lot of different publications on the evolving nature of these attacks. So I know one of the things that we offered in the agenda for this session was like the new stuff that's happening. And this is way more depth and way more quantity than I could possibly go into on today's presentation, but really cool stuff like using Google Tag Manager that's running probably on, 80% of the public facing internet, and just kind of hijacking its behavior to load whatever code you want. Getting around CSP really easily because of a bunch of different reasons that CSP is a pretty bad idea. And also other stuff like I said, double entry attacks with some actual illustration of it. So Like I said, just kind of a brief plug. Oh, and one more thing that I thought was cool was the was the kind of 2004 year in recap, and they're working on one of these for 2025 right now. But this stuff will get you really up to speed if you're looking for more of the current research and understanding of the attacks. But they all stem from the same thing. What I mean by that is these are all variations on the theme of get code into the browser and do bad stuff with it. The DSS, then, the data security standard, was, as I'm sure most people are aware, according to the poll, was amended like 3 years ago. And these two requirements, 643 and 1161, were best practice until April when they became actually truly required. I guess while I'm here, let's just talk about the SAQA thing. The SAQA, the Self-Attestation Questionnaire, version A, was amended right around the same time that the standard came into effect. Some people are kind of under the impression that 643 and 1161 were removed, either from DSS or from the SAQA or something else, and that's not true, or that's not a good way to. What happened was the SAQA, which is the most kind of basic form of attestation an organization can use to say I'm in compliance, the eligibility criteria for that thing was changed to say that you have to prove that your site isn't susceptible to script-based attacks, or you have to use 643 and 1161, which every QSA to whom I've spoken has said, like, well, like functionally the outcome of that is you have to do 643 and 1161 or come up with your own really interesting way to verify that your site is not susceptible, right? And then because they're QSAs, they have nothing, they're not just going to make up their own criteria. They're going to fall back on 643 and 1161. So all I'm suggesting is that anyone on the phone who is taking that approach or wants to maintain eligibility for the SAQA and et cetera, I would, just urge you to look very carefully at whether or not, if you're under the apprehension that you don't need to do it, you might be wrong. I'm trying to be political about it. So just, think carefully about the path you take there. Anyway, the requirements, when you boil them down, say that you have to inventory any payment page scripts. You have to make sure they're authorized to be there and that there is a written technical or business reason for the script to be on a payment page, a justification. And you have to implement a method to assure the integrity of each payment page script. And by the way, this word integrity here is doing some weird stuff where, again, it's put in the standard, like right over here, which I don't include on this slide. Right over here, there's guidance that says stuff about sub-resource integrity. You do not need to use need to use CSP and SRI to satisfy these requirements. So they put the words integrity and then sub-resource integrity right next to each other, and you don't actually have to do that. If you are familiar with this document, and if you're not, I would urge you to take a look at it. This is the DSS supplement, the guidance document that the council prepared with a task force. I was actually on that task force to help illustrate a lot of this stuff. This document is very useful. If you just Google DSS 643.1161 guidance, this will pop up. This is very useful for a couple reasons. I wanted to point out this thing in particular, which is on page 17, right? This table down here. Yep, there it is. So this is on page 17 of this document. And what this is a summary of controls and techniques. Now, what this means is when the group was writing this thing, you don't want people to think, oh, I turn on CSP and SRI and then everything solves, because each of the different controls that you could use may map to different parts of the requirement, but it's not like there's one thing that just solves it, at least if you're trying to do a DIY solution. So when you look at integrity here, the reason I brought this up is that you can see there's a bunch of different controls you could use to do this, like SRI or web page monitoring or a proxy-based solution or file hashing. So the point is that there's a lot of ways to do integrity without using sub-resource integrity. And also that just a plug for this document, which I think is really good, and this table in specific. If you're thinking about like DIYing this, like building an in-house solution, this is kind of a, I wouldn't call it a map exactly, but it's more like a compass. This will help you point in the right direction and hopefully help you think about some of the complexity of rolling your own solution here. So moving right along, requirement 1161 You also have to monitor what are called the HTTP response headers. So for anyone who's not technical, the hypertext transfer protocol is the thing that browsers and servers use to talk to each other. The headers are metadata that comes along with the page contents. So we as visitors don't see these, but they can contain security settings. And so the standard mandates that we deal with them in this context. So to sum up, inventory, justify, assure the integrity, and HTTP headers are what I would put into this as like the things that one must do to be compliant. The common misconceptions I hear, and we have heard over the last years, is that if you are fully redirecting to an e-commerce provider, you don't have to do anything else. And there are cases, like very specifically technical cases, where that's true. But you need to look at it with some scrutiny. The guidance document I just mentioned has guidance about that, where it breaks out kinds of redirects and where your checkout lives in your thing. And I know this is kind of an interesting topic in higher ed in specific, because you've got cases like TouchNet and then other third-party service providers who have different amounts of modularity, let's say. But the takeaway from this is there's a lot of cases where the page that is doing the redirection, sending somebody somewhere else, still has scope, specifically, just to get into the technicals, specifically if the redirect is accomplished through JavaScript. So if the page is using JavaScript to send somebody somewhere else to do the payment, unfortunately, that payment page at the beginning of that, that page that does the redirect at the beginning is in scope, or at least the script that does the redirection. My e-commerce is going to block all scripts on payment pages. I don't hear this too very often, but yeah, I guess the root thing here is that it's a very good intention to say we're going to remove all or as much JavaScript from our payment pages as possible. And yes, that is a very good kind of, again, engineer brain way to think of the problem. It's almost impossible from a practical business case, because you do that, or you come in with that strategy, and there's going to be a e-commerce or alumni development or advancement systems or something, people who make the money happen. They're going to say, well, we need as many of these tools as possible because it drives transactions. So you have this tension between those two, the security and then the actual business requirement, tale as old as time. So a good idea, really hard to do. We fully outsource all payments, and we've got iframes. Basically, we hear this much, much less as education has continued. I mean, not higher ed, but the education on the topic has advanced. Iframes are no longer the entirety, the end all be all. 3.2, DSS 3.2 did make that, that was kind of the case in the past. It is no longer the case now, mainly because of that double entry stuff I mentioned. And if you only run first-party scripts on payment pages that you don't have to do anything, you do have to do all the stuff for first-party scripts that I just mentioned, including inventory and integrity assurance. And so that's, third parties are a huge part of the risk, but first parties are as well. And so DSS I don't actually think it makes a distinction anywhere in there between the two. The guidance probably talks about it, but as far as DSS itself is concerned, it's just scripts. That's all it cares about, not the relationship to the page. So let's talk a little bit about ScriptSafe and how it works. And it's powered by Source Defense, and Campus Guard can offer it to you guys to take away a lot of the compliance pain. So the not quite technicals, but like how this works architecturally or structurally is that this is a solution you would add to your payment pages. We just get integrated into the payment page. We supplement, we don't need to be integrated into your firewall or WAF, but we kind of extend the security of web application security into the browser at runtime. So ScriptSafe, powered by Source Defense, is going to get loaded into the web page, and we do a whole bunch of stuff when we're in there. We monitor a huge amount of stuff about the behavior of JavaScript. So that's a very important distinction for us, meaning that we don't care too much about like the code files and if they change, and the like the sub-resource integrity approach of, oh, is this file different than it was an hour ago? What we're looking at is the behavior of JavaScript. Is our analytics tool looking at credit card numbers? I mean, is your vendor's analytics tool looking at credit card numbers? Is some tool that you've never heard of before, did it just get added to the site? And beyond just the information collection and reporting, We also control code as it runs in the browser. So we can isolate it from the web page altogether. It's still running in the browser, it's kind of its own little sandbox. We can force it to load in there, including any of its kind of relationships, its fourth or fifth party included files. We can force all that to run inside of a sandbox and then control its behavior, meaning that if a script tries to steal card numbers, we can literally block that specific behavior, but still allow the tool to do what it's supposed to do. So we're not just an on-off switch for these scripts, we're actually providing a behavioral filter is a good way to think of it. And in that way, it's really doing two things. One, it's certainly providing the security you need to meet the e-skimming part of DSS, but two, it's putting you in a, like just a much stronger security spot, generally speaking, because you can say to alumni development or et cetera, hey, add whatever marketing tools you want. ScriptSafe can automatically manage them. Like it can apply policies to them automatically without you having to take action. And so those tools are automatically secured and compliant without having to add burden to a security team's operations. And I'll show you guys I'll just walk you through the dashboards as well, since since we're all here together today. As a reminder, if you do have any questions, throw them in the chat. I'll happy to answer those and take the conversation where it would be most useful. So what this actually looks like is this. We provide both the underlying capability, meaning like, we block e-skimming attacks and prevent damage to websites. But I think more importantly, right now is that we make it really easy to use that capability in the context of compliance. Long story short, we'll give you workflows and ways to integrate this into your operations. So you're not like hiring a new FTE, a new full-time employee to do this work. What you're looking at on the screen right here is the Source Defense ScriptSafe PCI DSS dashboard. So this would be for a given website, maybe this is the bookstore or something like that. It's showing me what I need to do to make sure that this website is compliant. And this is kind of, imagine this is, we're in the middle, this is up and running. This isn't a brand new install. This is something that's been in place for a little while. And so we're just kind of touching it up. So I might get into here, because as a result of an alert. Let's say I received an email alert, or through my security operations software, or Splunk or Slack or something else. We can integrate with any number of different things. I receive an alert, and then I would hop into this dashboard and review the work I need to do. So for instance, I have one new script that requires justification, basically. I can click on this manage button. That brings me into a list of just the scripts that I need to deal with. So basically a to-do list, right? In this case, Google Maps looks like it's new and it needs a justification. I can click through here, and then I see more detail about Google Maps. I can drill in and see information about its behavior. So what I'm doing right now is trying to figure out, okay, I know the script is on here. I know it needs a justification. What other context can I kind of use to understand what the script is doing and why we're using it? So for instance, I can see, oh, it's talking to other parts of the internet. That's cool with me. It's using browser storage, no big deal. And it's not doing, more importantly, maybe it's not doing any of these things like communicating with a blacklisted domain, et cetera. So I'm comfortable with that. I'll have Source Defense automatically generate a justification. So now I wrote a justification. I might want to add something to the end of this about, such and such a person owns this tool in a business sense. We added this for XYZ campaign or something like that. But nonetheless, Source Defense will get you 95% of the way there with the justifications. When I click authorize to justify, that takes care of that work. It files that away for my future assessment purposes. And when I head back over to the DSS dashboard, you can see that this part is now 100%. And then I think the other important thing to point out is how we do the integrity assurance. So I've said a few times, we're not relying on, is the file different than it was before? What we're doing is looking at those behaviors that I mentioned and seeing what's new. Let me pull a little better example of this. How about Google? How about HubSpot? Showing you what's new since the behaviors were last authorized or last acknowledged. So the idea is when the system's brand new, you would hop in here, you would acknowledge the behaviors that you're comfortable with. And then in the future, Source Defense will notify you if those behaviors change. So you can see these new items here. So we're saying that the script is doing something it didn't do before. you haven't said these things are okay. So we're telling you, hey, the integrity might be in question. You need to hop in here and re-acknowledge and review the behaviors and acknowledge them. So once I click that button, you can see these are all acknowledged, and now the script is back in compliance, is the idea. And because we're looking at these in a behavioral sense for integrity rather than in a did the file change sense, this should be way quieter, like way fewer alerts and way less work than other approaches, because it's really just the important like actual actions that are happening rather than more technical fluff that's going around. And there's lots of other benefit to this. For instance, we can provide on the inventory sense, just a lot of quality of life stuff. So you can see here a visualization of the different scripts on a given payment page, including that supply chain effect. So if somebody's asking me like, why are we using the Zoom info service? Well, we're doing that because the YouTube image preview script loaded it, which in turn was loaded by the YouTube player, which in turn was loaded by a marketing tool called Matomo. So if I'm trying to justify Zoom info, I might want to include that relationship in here. So it makes sense because, like I was saying before, nobody really added Zoom info to the page. There may very well be no one at the organization that owns this payment page where we're installed that knows why this is why this is here, because it was loaded by other services. So that kind of work can be very, very useful. The other thing I would point out is that we certainly can help across an entire website, and we can so you could deploy us site-wide if you wanted to, and we could narrow this information down to just your PCI scope. So by ticking this box here, now this list is only the items related or in scope for DSS. You could also certainly deploy us only to your payment pages if you wanted to. And then, like I mentioned, a lot of our value is to actively control that code inside of the web pages and defeat these attacks before they can do damage. So you can see here for a tool called Breezy that's running on this particular payment page. Source Defense is redacting any card information if Breezy tries to access it. So we're actually, if this is used as part of a supply chain attack, like I showed you from the Times, Source Defense and ScriptSafe would actively block that behavior. We would still let Breezy do its thing if the attack hasn't ripped out its beneficial behavior. But assuming that we're just have a skimmer that's kind of riding along with Breezy, we're going to let Breezy do its stuff, and we're going to prevent it from stealing card numbers, is the idea. It's not just an on-off switch that will kill scripts if it seems suspicious. Oh, and just as a kind of not like a footnote, it's important, but Source Defense will certainly automatically collect all of those headers that I talked about, narrow them down to just the security affecting headers. That's the language in DSS. There can be dozens of these things, but you really only need to track the ones related to security, and then give you options about how you want to be notified to changes to those headers in the future. So we certainly take care of that as well. And then one more note, let me just switch around here real fast. One of the things we talk about a lot these days is kind of multi-site management, especially in the higher ed use case. You guys probably have tens and dozens are almost the same thing, but a lot of sites across the institution that are in scope for this. And so something we can certainly do is support multiple different sites and multiple different payment pages and do it in kind of an easy fashion. So here you can see a use case of an e-commerce site that has multiple different kind of country level domains, meaning Germany, Greece, etc. If I'm managing this particular site, what I can do is, for instance, I'm using Hotjar on 2 of those sites in Italy and then the US, it looks like. I can tick this box, select all of them. I can generate a justification for them and then apply it across the entire, estate, so to speak, across all the sites where that's relevant. So if you have sort of a diverse population of websites and of payment pages, but they share tools or other things across the org, we've got some really cool workflows in here to make that easy to do. And then, last, maybe not least, but, the end of the life cycle for compliance is the reporting part, right? Where you have to prove to an assessor or internally that you're doing this stuff. So I can click this button and get an archive, a zip archive of all the reporting that a QSA might ever want. We design these reports in concert with QSAs. So basically you click this button and then you can attach it to your assessment and you should be done with 643 and 1161. That's the end of the life cycle for ScriptSafe and enabling compliance. Oh, and by the way, one more note. We got a lot of, I think, very good in-product tutorials. I know that's not like the most flashy thing in the world, but this will literally walk you through how to make your site compliant in your own data. Like it's not just a generic tutorial. So I think especially this first year, as folks are getting up to speed with how to operationalize this, like practically do it in a day-to-day sense, this will go a really long way towards making it easy to sock it into your actual work, rather than having to become a trainer in this stuff, and so on and so forth. So to sum up, some of the benefits here, I think it's most important to think about isolating those foreign scripts, blocking the harmful behaviors, right, instead of the scripts altogether, and therefore letting the beneficial behavior still happen. This all occurs in real time. And that's important to note too. The inventories, the header gathering, all that stuff is real time. So it's not just a point in time scan. Hey, there was an attack over the last month. We should have dealt. This is actual live information about your site and your security. And then you can easily add that third-party code, like just throw a bunch of marketing tools at it, at the site, with security and confidence and ease of compliance. A 30-day plan. I've still been hearing from folks that they are trying to get compliant. Maybe they saw a gap in a recent assessment or et cetera. And so we do have some good advice, I think, to get up to speed. Discovery is the first step. And as we said there, good news, you're already here. You have to understand what you've got and what you need. DSS has provided a lot of clarity about this, basically saying that you need to get your payment pages in scope. Campus Guard and ourselves, Source Defense, would be happy to aid in that process. So reach out to your relationship manager or to whoever else supports your team, and we can help you define that scope pretty easily. Evaluations with us can be very straightforward. So once you know who you want to include in that evaluation, like from your organization, who the relevant people are, I can get an evaluation done. My office, so to speak, runs those. We can get you through an evaluation in like a week, from soup to nuts, and provide you with all the evidence you might need to decide whether or not this is a good solution for your needs. And then acquisition and completion, we can be really fast. In fact, this is saying 30 days, and this slide is about a year old, to be honest. These are going much, much faster than this, especially with some of the relationship we've built with Campus Guard. There are some licensing options available where we can go very quickly. There are some technical reasons that we can go very quickly. So, for instance, my fastest deployment at this point, I think, was about 12 hours to help some folks who were responding to an incident. And on average, it's probably taken us less than a week to go from signatures to something up and running. And frankly, a lot of the times, the evaluation environments we use can be promoted right into production, meaning like once you do the work of the evaluation, you can also move on from there. So just to reiterate some of those points, and we'll leave these here. We're going to provide all these materials to the audience. So you guys will have a copy of all this. So no need to read this to you, but the idea is we're here to support you, understanding what you need to get done, to let you kick the tires and understand whether or not it is a good solution for you, and then to actually put it into practice, and let you see some value very quickly from it, and also meet whatever deadline you're trying to hit for compliance. So I have seen some questions trickle in. I'll find a nice slide to park us on, maybe this guy right here. And then we'll take those questions in Q&A and wrap up. Let's see here. An anonymous attendee asks, what does your company do with the information? Okay, so the question here is, if Source Defense and ScriptSafe see a script trying to skim credit card numbers, what do we do with it? What does Campus Guard say a merchant should do as it pertains to incident response plan? So my recommendation would be that you would run ScriptSafe with the capability I'm showing on the screen, with what we call Source Defense Protect. That would actually block the script accessing sensitive information that it should not have access to. It's a key part of what we do. Let's say in a more general sense that you're just alerted to, well, I guess also in there is, what does your company do with the information? We ourselves never collect any personally identifiable information or card information or anything else sensitive. The only thing we record or collect is the information about what the scripts are doing as they're running in the browser. So the behavior of the scripts, but not like the content of those behaviors. I'll tell you that Google Analytics is touching a form field, but I won't tell you what was in the form field when that happened. And that's on purpose. It would be a really bad idea if we became a clearinghouse for all the sensitive information through your site. So the recommendation would be that you run ScriptSafe in protection mode, that it will actually block those malicious behaviors. That in the case where you are alerted to a malicious behavior occurring, that you either work with the vendor who's doing that to remove this, to remediate that, or you remove the script outright from the site, or you block it in ScriptSafe. So there are lots of options to remediate that, or not remediate it at all because we blocked it from doing damage.
Okay. I see another question here. What kind of guidance should we be giving to our SAQA merchants? We don't currently have a solution that meets the second bullet under FAQ 1588.
So you broke up there just a little bit, Kathy. So merchants who don't have a solution and do meet the second bullet for SAQA?
Yes.
Yeah, the advice I've heard from QSAs and just generally speaking is that you should use 643 and 1161. So I know folks are looking for room to move inside of the SAQ eligibility criteria, and I mean, I don't want to say do the least that they can, but SAQA was a lightweight approach to saying you were compliant. The best way and most defensible way that you can do that is to prove that your site is not susceptible to these attacks. And so do something like what I'm showing on the screen, which are the bones, the skeleton of 643 and 1161. Do something that still checks these boxes, and then find a way to prove it on the SAQA is the best guidance I can give you. A lot of QSAs are just straight up falling back to 643 and 1161 and saying, do that, unfortunately, because they don't, they're not going to make up their own methodology to prove it. They're just going to use what the Security Council wrote. It's a good question. Try to do these things, is to sum it up.
Another question here. What tips would you offer for streamlining the vendor evaluation and onboarding process?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think one of the more important things is work with a vendor who has a relationship like we do with Campus Guard. There's an immense number of things that our relationship, Source Defense and Campus Guard, let us do. Like I said, from a licensing standpoint, from an evaluation standpoint, these guys know your environments, like your payment ecosystem, really well, and can help immensely with the scope. So I think that's one of the most important things. And then I'd start asking questions like, how long does it take to get through an evaluation of a solution? What are the outcomes that I can expect at the end of this, and what support comes along the way? So what I mean by that, like I mentioned before, with ScriptSafe and Source Defense, most of the time, I want to say all the time now, we can just take the work we do during the evaluation and put it straight into production. So like you'll have justifications and you'll have behavior acknowledgements and the code you need to put into place, which is literally a copy and paste job, by the way. All that you don't have to duplicate that work again to go into prod. It just goes straight from there to there. So those are the kind of questions I would ask. How good is the vendor relationship with my chosen partner, i.e. Campus Guard? And then what can I expect to get out of the evaluation and how quickly?
Okay, great. We have another question. How does implementing a solution like this help PSPs support SAQA eligibility for merchants?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for anybody if anyone on the phone is a payment service provider, maybe, or you certainly have a relationship with one if you're on the call, you want to basically if you're a merchant, a payment service provider has to tell you that they are compliant with these things. The form they put inside their iframe has to be compliant. And then if you're a merchant, your web page where that form is embedded also has to be compliant. So if you're a PSP, you need a way to prove you're doing this stuff on the screen and to prove it to your merchants. If you're a merchant, you need a way to get from that PSP proof that they're doing it. And I think one of the easiest ways of doing that is obviously if you have a relationship or an implementation of something like Source Defense, because then that evidence kind of becomes nicely portable between both parties. You can provide something from Source Defense and et cetera. A related question just popped up in the chat. Have you ever seen a third party like Stripe take responsibility and say your site is safe using their iframe essentially? Yeah, so some of the language in the SAQA eligibility criteria says like, if the PSP that you're using can prove that the merchant site is not susceptible to attacks because of how you implement Stripe or another payment service provider solution, then they can take responsibility for that. I think the question is really nicely phrased is, Have I ever seen a third party do that? The answer is no. I have not yet seen a payment service provider say, yes, we're taking on this responsibility for all of our merchants. Because if you think, and just to get a little inside baseball about this, a little like what's going on in the industry, you think about it from their perspective, they're saying, okay, for all of our merchants, we are now taking on a huge additional amount of responsibility about the security of all of their websites that we provide services for. And I just haven't seen anyone want to do that or make like a business case where it makes sense. So that language is in the SAQA, like go ask your PSP if they're making your website secure. I've just never seen anyone do it or offer it or kind of frankly want to do it. So I mean, Source Defense has relationships with PSPs. We provide a lot of security functionality there. I think there's always an opportunity that stuff's going to kind of trickle down. But as of today, no, I haven't seen Stripe or any of the other PSPs take responsibility for the page into which they are embedded.
Okay. If I got another question, if I'm just getting started today, what's the first step I should take to get compliant and protected?
Sure. I think reaching out to the folks at Campus Guard, anyone with whom you have a relationship there, knows about ScriptSafe. They know how to work with Source Defense and get you started. Another option would be to hit sourcedefense.com/free PCI. That will let you fill out a form, and we can actually generate some dashboards like you saw and do a few other things without you deploying any code. So if you want to, sourcedefense.com/free PCI is a good way to get started. Or like I said, Campus Guard is more than up on the topic and can help guide you through the process as well.
Okay, great. One last question. What's the next big shift in PCI compliance for fraud prevention we should be preparing for?
That's interesting. Yeah, just to speculate a little bit, I think that this topic, specifically the web page stuff, will get broader. I think right now they're using the term payment page and kind of like very limited parts of the websites where people do commerce on purpose. What I mean by that is I think these are hard requirements for people to meet. And so the scope was kept pretty narrow just to make it like possible. But I would expect the scope to expand as new versions of DSS come out. The reason being, like you saw in the attack demo, if an attacker is anywhere on a website, they can ask for a card number, or they can use that trust that someone, if I'm logging into my university's bursar website, I expect to be secure the whole way. So I think what will happen for better for the visitor, worse a little bit maybe for folks who have to be compliant, is that the entire site's going to become in scope eventually. Just because that's like where the security case started way back in the day. If your whole site should be secure, I think the Security Council made this kind of narrow to just pages where payment information is entered. But I think the trend overall will be that all of our web applications will have to be secure if you can enter payment information at any point during your experience there. So maybe that's a little scary note to end on because we're coming up on Halloween. Yeah, it's a little bit of that. Hate to be that guy, but I think that's where it's going.
All the questions we have. Thanks again, Matt, for your insightful presentation, and to all of our attendees for participating in today's webinar. Just a quick reminder, please take our brief survey, which will launch immediately after the webinar is ended. If you have any questions you think of later, feel free to reach out to us. If you want to request a demo, just let us know. And thanks again. Have a wonderful day.